Welcome to one of the first sessions this morning.
It's called Delivering Impact in Low and Middle Income Countries in the Global South. So we've got three speakers. We've got Penny from Education and Training Africa and Patrick from the University of Oxford. They're going to talk to us about school clubs and social enterprise, two routes to impact from water research in Kenya. And we've got Carlos Lopez-Galviz from Lancaster University, who's going to talk to us about equitable urban future in areas of transition. We were supposed to have another group speaking with Graham Clarkson, and Peter Dowart, but they're not here due to strike action, and we thought it was important to mention that. The key session focus is impact, as I said, impact in low and middle income country and the global south. One of the projects is focused in Africa and the other one in South America. And what we're going to hear about is the unique challenges of doing engagement in this region and how best to deliver impact. So we're going to hear about what works and what doesn't, basically. So Penny and Patrick, you're first.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go man the system here. So we have some videos. So I'm going to talk about two projects that we've been working on in Kenya. Both have come out of a larger research project that has been going for over a decade now in various forms, and that is a project about the maintenance of rural water systems in Kenya, which has had various offshoots from the research, and it's been funded by a number of partners, including ESRC, NERC, DFID when it was DFID, FCDO, and also UNICEF, plus some internal funding. So it's a bit of a classic story of a research program that has sort of been, slightly cobbled together as we go along, with the cartoon character putting the rails of the track down in front of the train. And today I'm going to talk about two sort of routes to impact from this. One of which is what would be you could view as on the core trajectory of the research. So it was the natural progression of the research was into what I will talk about, which is a social enterprise for maintaining hand pumps called Fundifix, which as well as a researcher I'm a trustee of. So that is in the sort of main trajectory of what we were, trying to do when we started the project. The other, which is, I've got my colleague Penny here with me, as well as other colleagues, Nancy and Saskia, who've been heavily involved in this for a long time, was a sort of offshoot of the project, which was an educational project that we did as a sort of as an offshoot. Because of the work we were doing in Kenya, we realised that engaging with local schools in southern Kenya was a great thing we could add to the project, and then that expanded now into Cameroon. And I think they're both really valid ways of having impact from research, but they come about in different ways, which I think means how you think about them, how you run them and organise them can be slightly different, and there's lessons from both. So I'm now going to try and play these two videos. Right. So this first one is the Water Learning Partnership video, and this is the project that Penny will be talking about as well as me. So once we've learned about Dettle, we can learn all about this. And this is something that one of the schools in Cameroon has put together for us.
I'm going to briefly talk about groundwater. When precipitation occurs, the water infiltrates into the soil. Some of that water goes to streams through a process called percolation and base flow. Some of the precipitated water clings on the soil, which is absorbed by plants to grow. And some of the water percolates down into the ground to a zone called the saturated zone, where it's filled with water. From our observation, we see that the water in gravel
infiltrates faster. Yes.
Because of the species.
Species are large.
Soil is compacted. The infiltration rate is faster in gravel than soil. And gravel is unable to absorb the water. Now in sand, soil has a high rate of saturation, and compared to all the different materials, and it absorbs more water.
this cycle, we have some keywords like evaporation. This is a process whereby water is exchanged between the atmosphere and the surface. As seen on that diagram there, evaporation from large water bodies goes into the atmosphere due to the heat coming from the sun, which is the water bodies, which causes the water not to turn into, because it's in the liquid state here, it turns now into the gaseous state and goes up to the atmosphere.
The water filter is made of 4 layers: rocks, gravel, sand, cotton. The rocks here are to trap the large dirt particles, while the second layer is to trap the smaller ones. The sand is to filter, and the cotton is to filter anyone that has managed to pass through.
Right, there we go. So that's the first one. So off the back of this research project into groundwater and rural water services, we produced some educational materials in Kenya, and then introduced those into secondary schools. And one of the secondary schools in Kenya, in fact, got into the final of the national science competition, doing some of the things that they'd inspired by this work, which was great. And then this was how we adapted it through to Cameroon, and that's showing what the children at the school presented, having gone through this module, which is now getting integrated into their environmental and science curriculum. So the second video I'm going to play is about Fundifix, and Fundifix is an organization that we set up as part of the research, initially to support the research, because we needed an operational organization to effectively generate the data for the research, but then, which was always the plan, if the research worked, was this would then be spun out as an independent entity, which it now has been. So I'm going to play a video that we produced a few years ago about that. Things have moved on since then, which I will talk about when we sit down with the panel session. So second video.
Providing rural water services presents challenges around the world, with roughly 1/3 of systems not working at any one time. In Kwale County, southeastern Kenya, most of the rural population rely on 300 functioning hand pumps for their daily water supply. It's a challenge to keep these hand pumps working over time.
Kutoka huu mradi tuseme ufanywe, ikiharibika maliza kama wiki moja, wiki ya pili twatengezewa hapo mwanzo, lakini sasa hii na mwaka mzima haijaharibika.
Monitoring hand pumps with transmitters gives better information to understand breakdowns and usage. An online database can show when hand pumps were broken and fixed, or how much they are used. This is essential for the validation of repairs and information sharing in remote rural areas, keeping the service accountable to government, donors, and other stakeholders. Fundifix Kwale Limited is a maintenance service provider offering a professional service linked to performance-based contract with each community. When a hand pump breaks down, community members call a hotline number. Local mechanics are notified and sent out to make the repair.
Sasa twashukuru sana, manake likiharibika umetuletea simu ya kupiga ile simu, alafu wenyewe wanajua kama boli namba fulani limeharibika, alafu anatuletea fundi anakuja tengeza.
Piloting the maintenance service has been successful in reducing breakdown times by an order of magnitude to less than 2 days. It has also created significant trust between the communities and the maintenance service provider. However, monitoring and repairing hand pumps is only part of the answer. A business case is needed for financial sustainability in the long term. Community payments per hand pumps are made regularly using mobile money, with confirmation of payments being sent to several community members for transparency. Pooling resources shares risk across the service area alongside user payments. Sustainable financing mechanisms can be developed with funding from government, development partners, and private companies. The model can be scaled up to include other rural water infrastructure, such as small piped systems, submersible pumps, and kiosks. With work ongoing into the legal and institutional setup, the model can be replicated across the 47 counties in Kenya and in other countries, with an aim of providing universal water services.
So, as you would have heard from that, the key thing is the financial challenge and the sustainability challenge, which is what we are working on at the moment, and will come up more in the discussion. But Fundifix has been, for about, let's say, roughly the last 5 years or so, been maintaining the water services for around 70,000 people in rural Kenya. So that's quite an impact. But how we can sustain that impact in the long term, now that the research is winding up, is the tricky thing, which I think we'll get onto shortly. So thank you very much, and colleague.
Fantastic. So we're going to hear from Carlos now. He's going to tell us about equitable urban future in areas of transition in Colombia, right?
Exactly right. Yes, Colombia, Cuba. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this session. So I think there's going to be quite a number of different points of resonance between the two projects, partly because it is, when I saw the call for papers for this conference, it's very much hope into action. It's actually trying, and by now, after a short time, so we don't have the 5 or 7 years trajectory that we have, that you have with your project, it's a GCRF, so this is the Global Challenge. It's a GCRF funded project that has been running since 2020. So we started right in the middle of the pandemic. So we're still trying to work out precisely how to make sustainable and long-lasting some of the discoveries that we're having. So I'm standing here in sort of on behalf of 21 colleagues, researchers divided across 4 different institutions. Lancaster is the lead institution. We work closely. This is going. Do I have control over this or not? Because I haven't touched anything so far, but if it goes, then I'll stop it. Good. Sorry about that. But so it's in the UK, so it's Lancaster University and UCL, and we have 2 academic institutions, one in Colombia, that's Universidad del Valle in Cali, and we also have the Technological University of Havana in Cuba. So these are the 4 partner institutions, and the 2 local institutions in Cali and in Colombia, they have fantastic relationships, both with local authorities, but also established relationships with the communities that we're working with. GREAT is the acronym of the project, so we use the noun GREAT as a verb, so it's creating equitable urban futures in areas of transition, and we do that in, as I said before, in these 2 cities, Cali, which is the 3rd largest city of Colombia, and Havana, which is obviously Cuba's capital. And this is a largely very, very interdisciplinary project, lots of expertise across the social sciences, the natural sciences, and the arts and the humanities. So this is the location of the 2 cities in Colombia and in Cuba, and of the settlements that we're working with. So we're working with communities from informal settlements in the southwest. So that's the Comuna 18, or the district number 18. And in the case of Havana, we started with the 2 preliminary studies with the ones on your left, Traviesa and Fanguito. But we're actually ended up focusing on San Nicolas, which is the port development area, which is being scheduled for redevelopment for the last 50 to 60 years. We work around something we call public labs. And those public labs are social laboratories where a variety of different publics meet. In those publics are members of the GREAT team, members of the project, is policymakers and local authorities, certainly key members of the community, as well as interest groups and institutions. And they're thematic. So the first one is policy and urban planning. The second one is transport and mobility. And the last one is, or the third one is zero waste. For us, studying informality and studying what equitable urban futures might look like from contexts of informality raises some really critical questions, partly to do with what it means to do that from residences or environments where participation in consumer society and civic democracy are limited. And we know that this affects a very significant amount of people. So this is 2016, 1 in every 4 residents experiencing very challenging living conditions across the world. We have 3 concepts. They mean very different things, which is one of the wonderful things about doing this relatively comparatively, although my colleagues wouldn't always allow me to say that we're doing a comparison. But there's a contrast between the situation in Colombia and in Cuba, and transitions, for example, in the case of Cuba, is very much to do with the launching of a new constitution, which happened towards the end of 2019 and into 2020, whereas transition in Colombia is to do with transitional justice. This is following the signing of the ceasefire agreement between the Colombian government in 2016 and the FARC, that will be probably some of you may be familiar with, the guerrilla that has been active in Colombia since the 1960s. We also talk about intersectionality questions around gender, class, ethnicity. In the case of Colombia, whether or not the residents of these communities have been the victims of the armed conflict. And very importantly, we want to identify, capitalize, and try to incorporate their own imaginaries of change into the visions of the future of these two cities, the cities being Cali and Havana. Because of time constraints, I think I'm only going to focus on the work that we've done in connection to one of these public labs, and that public lab is zero waste. So we've done a very significant amount of work with workshops at the community, and this is the example comes from Cali, so all from Colombia. So I'm not discussing Havana, but I'll be happy to tell you more during the plenary discussion. So despite the challenges of COVID, so we started in April 2020, so right in the middle of it. So we couldn't do much for up to 18 months. But despite all of that, what we managed to then, after that, do was to set up a very good infrastructure of exchange with the community and with local authorities on dedicated events. And in this case, we're talking about solid waste management. So we started with very simple questions about defining waste at your household level. We also talk about in what ways can we reuse that waste and actually make it work for us being the household. And so it's about priorities, it's about what to do, the motivations behind it, where to do it. Is it at the household level, or is it on the street with your neighbors? Is it public spaces? Should the authorities be responsible for this? And so on and so forth. Interestingly, a key discovery from very early on is the crucial role of women in all of this. And not only that, it is actually intergenerational. So it's not just the grandmothers involved in all of this, not at all. It's actually across generations. And so that to us was a fantastic realization in terms of, I guess, what you could describe as social capital, but we don't need to get into the theories of any of that. But it's certainly an important recognition so that whatever initiatives we try and develop with them must build on this existing network of really resourceful women, to do with composting, to do with planting herbs for their kitchen gardens, but also to share with the community, repurposing things like copper wires to do bags and to do decorative elements for the households, and so on and so forth. And this is just one zoom in, if you like, one example of such a woman, and her name is Marianita Martinez. She doesn't describe herself as coming from any ethnicity as such. She has some limitations to do with her physical ability. She doesn't describe herself or has not suffered, as she hasn't been the victim of any of this, the armed conflict in Colombia. She's not from Cali herself, so she's a migrant. She came from rural areas. At the same time, she has managed to actually generate a very important amount of work from her peers, if you like, similar age, and that's the older adult group with a fantastic name, A New Sunrise, partly to invite them to recycle and repurpose things, very basically. And this is all entirely her initiative. She's been doing it for about 15 years. The key figure to remember is how much waste she generates per day, 230 grams per day. The average in the UK, the figures that we have are different. They're not connected, they're not per capita, they're per household. And in 2020, the estimates are between 1 to 1.4 kilograms per capita per day. So this is very significant. And if we actually contrast what she does with the areas where we're based, with this district number 18, we realize that she actually generates less than half the average of this district number 18, less than a third than the city and the country as a whole. So effectively, she is a net zero citizen, if you like. And what we're trying to do is to learn from that experience so that we use the practices effectively that she's been generating for years as a means of not trying to convince but persuade local authorities directly involved with the provision of services, for example, waste collection services in the area, to actually change their practices. So it becomes then, it's a means of translating that into the reality of what policy could actually mean in a city like Cali and in a district like Comuna 18. And this is just one of, by now, dozens of different stories. So we don't have time to go into any of this, but I'm just giving you a sense of, to us within the GREAT project, what these equitable urban future scenarios of transition mean. They're connected to each one of these figures because they're actually certainly the agents of change. And lastly, what we did in November was to launch something that we call the Popul Lab, which is a laboratory of popular neighborhoods. And what I like about that is that this is the community themselves translating what we came with, which was this notion of public labs that didn't quite speak their language, partly because it's an English word. So they decided to turn it into popular neighborhoods, which is closely related to their own reality. So they're actually appropriating that term. So by now, the local partner, Universidad del Valle, has launched this initiative together with the Secretary of Housing and Habitat. And 2 weeks ago, they actually launched a new undergraduate module, which is an interdisciplinary module across 2 different faculties, training the new undergraduates to work with communities from these settlements. And that's one way of perhaps ensuring some of the sustainability of the learnings of what we've done so far. In terms of policy, I'm nearly finished. Just one more slide. I don't know if anyone. But so in terms of policy, what we've done locally is to kickstart the titling process, to trying to legalize the plots and the houses that affect, in this case, about 10,000 people. Nationally, we have been contributing to the drafting of one specific working group about the new development, the National Development Plan. We have a series of data sets, we have community videos, a lot of resources that we can make available. They will be freely available to not only the community, but anyone interested in learning more about what we've done. We have a conference, which is the closing conference of the project in Lancaster towards the end of September, 21st to the 22nd. So I certainly welcome proposals for those of you wanting to share with us. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just give a round of applause for our speakers.